I'm your host, Michael Shermer. Before I introduce today's guest, I want to tell you about the offer from our sponsor, The Great Courses. This month is a free month of access to the Great Courses Plus app. So it looks like this. You have your phone or whatever device you're using. You touch on the app like that, boom, and the courses pop up. There's a whole variety of them, really hundreds that you can access. So let's say you're interested in taking this one, The Black Death, which is one I'm currently listening to. And the 24 different lectures pop up. Now, if you're already in the course, the lecture will just pick up wherever it is you last left off, which is a nice feature. Or if you just want to skip around, like say you want to skip from lecture 2 to lecture 13, Medieval Theories about the Black Death, you just touch on that, boom, and a little summary of the lecture pops up, so you can read about whether you want to listen to it or not. And then when you're ready to listen to it, you just hit play, and you're off and running. Now, if you don't want to do that and you decide you want to change courses in the middle, you can just do that. Here's a course I already took, Understanding the Dark Side of Human Nature. This is 24 lectures by Daniel Breyer. Anyway, you get the idea. So the offer this month is a free month of access to the Great Courses Plus. And to do that, go to thegreatcoursesplus.com/salon. That's thegreatcoursesplus.com/salon. Thanks for listening. My guest today is Brian Greene. His new book is Until the End of Time, Mind, Matter, and Our Search for Meaning in an Evolving Universe. Pretty much everything. Those of you that have been abducted by aliens, have been on Mars, and don't know who Brian Greene is, he's professor of physics and mathematics at Columbia University. You know his previous books, The Elegant Universe, The Fabric of the Cosmos, and The Hidden Reality, which were made into Nova miniseries that he hosted, and he's the co-founder of the World Science Festival in New York City. Brian, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it. It's nice to see you in person in Santa Barbara, where the coronavirus has not shut us down yet.
Yes.
So I thought I'd come at your book from what I do for a living, which is engage the public in all kinds of claims, science and pseudoscience, science and religion, science and morality, and so on. And the reason I loved your book so much is because you give us a way to answer the theists or the theological questions of, well, what's the meaning of life if there's no God, or we don't know if there's a God? Where do we get our morals? Where did it all begin? And so on. And you pretty much address that as much as we know the answers to those, which we may not know. So it's always good to remember it's okay to just say, we don't know for sure, but It could be this, could be that. And therein lies one difference between science and religion is we admit we don't have the answers necessarily, provisional truths, small t. So I thought we'd just get started with the biggest question of all, why is there something rather than nothing? Yeah, and you know the arguments. Well, what bang, the Big Bang? What was there before time began? Come on, give us the answer.
Well, I wish I could give you the full answer to that question. It's the question that, sometimes people always say, what's the one question that keeps you up at night? What's the one question you want to answer before you leave this earth? And it would certainly be the question that you asked, right? Why is there anything at all? And I don't know the answer to that question, but we do know answers to questions that brush up against that. For instance, as you said, what sparked the Big Bang? That's a more concrete question. We imagine that there was already space and time, and we say to ourselves, what would have forced everything to rush apart? And the beautiful answer that's come to us over the past 30 years or so is that there's a feature of gravity that isn't as widely appreciated by the public as it is by scientists, which is ever since Einstein, we learned that gravity can not only be attractive, which we've known about since Isaac Newton and we experience in everyday life, it can be repulsive in the right circumstances. And the circumstances are, if space is not populated by a clumpy thing like a rock or a planet or a star, then the gravitational pull can have a different character. If it's populated by energy that's uniformly suffusing a region, then according to Einstein, the gravity will be outward pushing. And that outward push may have been what sparked the Big Bang.
So we no longer have to define gravity in a circular way. It's the tendency for objects to attract one another. Why do objects attract one another? Gravity. You've gotten us out of that loop right there.
Yeah, I mean, there's still a little bit of circularity in that, any answer that science gives, you can always say, well, why is it that way?
Yeah.
And ultimately you have to say, well, it's from observation and experiment, and our math is trying to explain or at least give some coherence to what we observe. So then someone could say, well, Why do you observe that? Is it the math? Why the math? It's because you observe it. So there always will be this interplay between the two. But yeah, we've gone further than Isaac Newton did, and Isaac Newton was a pretty smart guy.
Yeah, indeed. So laws of nature, where are they? I mean, you touch on this a little bit. What are mathematical equations? They're human constructions. But then why do they match so beautifully with physical reality? So there must be a reality. But the laws of nature are just words we use or equations we use to describe something that's happening. Hydrogen gets converted to helium under certain pressures or whatever. How do you conceive of laws like that?
Well, I have to tell you, and as I describe in the book, my position on that question kind of changes, not daily, but it does flop and flip between the two extremes. One extreme is the math is actually describing reality. It's out there, independent of the human brain, and what we've been very good at is revealing the underlying mathematical laws that are able to capture the patterns of reality. Answer number one. Answer number two, we look at the world, we want to put some order on it, and we invent this language called mathematics, which is very good at encapsulating patterns, and then we adjust the mathematical terms in order that they're ever better at explaining the things that we have seen and ever better at predicting the things we've not yet seen. If you'd ask me which of those two positions I hold right now sitting here, it's more toward the latter, that math is something of human invention, and it's really good at describing the world, but I allow for the possibility that one day when we encounter aliens and they come down and say, show us what you guys have figured out about the universe, and we show them the equations, they kind of chuckle to themselves and say, yeah, we tried math for a while too, but here's the right way of doing it, and maybe it's something completely different.
I know. To me, that's one of the best arguments, either for encountering ETs or being chronically frozen and brought back 1,000 years from now and look back, oh, you guys believed that back in the 20th?
Yeah,
we are so past that. Here's what we know now. And then you go, oh, okay, that makes sense.
Right. A
little bit like when I was writing about the fine-tunedness arguments, because theists always bring this up.
Yeah.
And there was a quote from, what's his name? Not Weinstein. The Texas physicist.
Stephen Weinberg.
Stephen Weinberg, yeah. Where, you know, these 6 numbers that, the fine-tuned numbers or whatever, there may actually just be one. And we don't need to explain 6 things. There may be an underlying principle that we just haven't figured out.
Yeah, you know, it is somewhat curious that when you look out at the world, you recognize that had the force of gravity been a little bit different, had the nuclear forces been a little bit different, the electromagnetic force, the mass of the proton versus the mass of the neutron, you change any of these numbers and the world as we know it radically changes, right? It doesn't have the qualities that we're used to. So some would say, okay, so who fine-tuned the dials to allow, you know, stars and planets and human beings? And you're right, there's some who approach it from a religious perspective and think that there's an intelligent being that adjusted the dials. But we physicists don't feel that that's an adequate explanation, of course, and we hope that either the dials can't be adjusted by reasons that we haven't yet figured out. Maybe they have to have the values that they do. Or at the other extreme, we imagine maybe there are many, many universes where the values of those numbers are different in the different universes. And we live in this universe because the numbers happen to have the values that are hospitable to our form of life. And we don't exist in the other universes for the same reason we don't exist on Pluto. The conditions just aren't conducive for us to be there. So we are where we can be.
I really liked Lee Smolin's book, the Darwinian Universe or whatever it was called. But that natural selection of universes seemed plausible. I don't know how that stands amongst physicists now.
Oh, well, I think Lee is a firm proponent of it. I don't think there's really the kind of experimental and observational push in that direction. So I think it's a possibility. It's an interesting possibility, but not one that's really captured the imagination of the scientific community.
So that may be one of those where we just say, well, you know what? We don't know. And the theist can't say, well, that's just the way God wanted it, because that's not really an answer.
Yeah, so it's substituting one new idea for another.
We both hit the epistemological wall and go, well, we don't know.
Right.
All right. So entropy explains a lot. Your section on the second law was just great. I think I might have gotten it now, maybe, because I'm not a physicist. So it's not a law like forcing things to run down. It's what things naturally do, because there's more ways for disorder than order. So a sandcastle that a child builds, there's 1,000 other ways for it to not be a sandcastle, and it ends up in this sort of gruel of sand, whereas there's only one way to be a sandcastle, something like that.
Yeah, that's right on target. So I could even leave it there. He did a great job. So I can just reemphasize exactly the same point. As you're saying, for things to be disordered, generally that means that the ingredients can be rearranged and it will still be disordered, like your messy desktop, right? If someone comes in and rearranges a mess, it's still a mess. But if you have an ordered desktop and you rearrange it, it will look different, right? It doesn't have many rearrangements that allow it to still look ordered. And so there are many ways to be disordered. So things tend to be disordered because random motion of ingredients will pick out those outcomes that are more numerous. They're easier to happen. Whereas the ordered ones, it's harder for random motion of particles to land in a sandcastle as opposed to a pile of sand, because they have to be so exquisitely configured relative to each other to yield that sandcastle.
So how do you get complex systems like us from the Big Bang?
Yeah, so that is the big question. You might think that this second law of thermodynamics, that things tend to go from order to disorder, would say that you can't get orderly things in that progression,
right?
You know, like stars and planets and us. And what that misses is a subtlety of this idea, which is that overall, the disorder must go up. But that does not prevent you from having little pockets of order forming along the way, so long as the pockets of order form, they give rise to enough disorder in the surrounding environment so that on balance, disorder goes up, even though order itself can form here and there. I call this the entropic two-step.
I love that.
Which is you can have, disorder go down here so long as it goes up over there. And it's this dance between those two that allows stars and planets to form because they are dancing the entropic two-step.
Right. I don't know if you knew Tooby and Cosmides' paper, the second law of thermodynamics is the first law of psychology. Yeah, it's great.
I know their work, but I'm not familiar with that one.
It's a great title, and I adopted it in my last book, Heavens on Earth. The first law, second law of thermodynamics is the first law of life. That is to carve out a niche of order in this chaos.
Perfect.
And as long as you have a sun or some source of energy, or in the deep hot biosphere, some kind of the interior of the Earth provides some energy, but in the long run, it'll all run down. But in the short run, so I love that you, just sort of jumping ahead, I love that you brought up Annie Hall, because I wrote one of my Scientific American columns. I call it Alveys Error, which is, why should I bother to do anything? Because in billions of years, the universe is going to fall apart. And his mother screams at him, what's the universe got to do with it? We live in Brooklyn, and Brooklyn's not expanding. Right. So, because this is the theist argument that, like William Lane Craig makes this argument, if there's no God, if there's no eternity, if there's no afterlife, then what's the point of all this? And he actually uses examples like suffering in the Holocaust or whatever. Why does it matter? Because it matters to us now. People that are really suffering in the here and now. Brooklyn's not expanding, So I love that, because I think people misconceive of what sort of time frames, that you're talking about time, billions of years. What difference does it make? We live for a few decades. That's it. Now is what counts.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And sometimes when people think about the far future, like Alvey sort of was. Although, frankly, I'm not sure what Alvey was worried about. It was the 1970s. We didn't know a lot. But anyway, that's a separate issue. But when you think about a far future, when stars have disintegrated and planets are gone, and perhaps there's no possibility for life or thought to exist, it can feel bleak, and you can come to this issue of why does any of this matter? And my perspective really resonates with yours. The view is that, we are tiny, both in space. We're limited in time. And that, to me, only makes it more spectacular regarding what we're able to do in that limited domain. We can figure stuff out, right? We figured out quantum mechanics, right? We can create these wonderful works, from Beethoven's Ninth Symphony to Macbeth, right, to the Mona Lisa, right? We can figure out the workings of life. We can even start to figure out how it is that we can figure things out by virtue of understanding conscious awareness. So it is this capacity of the human species which emerged through mindless laws, purposeless laws, just entropy and evolution intertwining along the course of cosmological history for a brief moment allows us to be here, and we can take that moment and do glorious things with it. And that, to me, is where the meaning and purpose comes from.
Yeah, I think so. it's hard to convey to religious people that that's enough.
Yeah.
Or even maybe people are not religious, they're just not sure. And there's something in human psychology of like something outside us that gives us the purpose. But if you push them on that, well, how would that give purpose? I mean, what difference does it make? Because it's the here and now that. But there's something in the human psychology that you discuss this in the book about, seeing agency everywhere, hidden agents and patterns, and that's in part the basis of God beliefs and religion.
Yeah.
Seems to be wired into us to.
It is, but I guess the thing, I guess not everybody will agree on these kinds of issues, which is great. It's what makes conversations interesting, makes the world go around. But my feeling is that were I given the choice between a universe that did have something out there, a God or whatever, that would bestow purpose, versus a universe in which that didn't exist and it was up to us to figure it out and to make our own purpose, that situation feels more ennobling to me, more empowering. So I'm not giving purpose by virtue of the fact that somebody else's purpose I am acquiring or wearing. I'm rather given the power to figure out what it is that I want to inject that will give purpose and meaning. And that feels to me a better situation.
Yeah. Yeah, you got kind of personal in this book. I like the story about you and your brother.
Yeah.
You guys were raised secular Jews?
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
So your parents were not religious, but they practiced the culture of Judaism.
Yeah.
And your brother branched off into the
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishnas. When people our age remember seeing him at the airport with handing out the flowers and asking for donations. Exactly. So where does that stand with him now?
Well, he still is a Hare Krishna devotee. He is definitely within that community with part of his life, but he's also stepped away in other ways. He's a writer and a filmmaker and very much in the world. And if you saw him walking down the street, there's no obvious evidence. He doesn't any longer dress with the garb and doesn't have the hair the way they had it, say, back in the 60s and 70s. But his mindset is very much a spiritual one. And I have to say, so is mine, but differently, which makes for interesting conversation.
So what do you mean by being spiritual or religious in a material sense?
What I mean is that I get an emotional reaction when I look at the equations of general relativity or quantum mechanics. I don't sit there crying at the equations or anything like that. But the beauty of the equations and their power at describing everything in the world, and that's an attitude that I've had for a long time. I remember when I was an undergraduate in college, I so wanted to learn the general theory of relativity that I went and bought the textbook long before I could understand it. And I would kind of walk around with the textbook. I would take it out. I would kind of caress the text. I so wanted to know these truths that were in there. And it wasn't just sort of a cognitive interest, which it was partly, but it's a real emotional desire to connect with the universe in a meaningful way. And the way I do that is through the math and the equations.
Yeah. I get the same feeling going into astronomical observatories, like Mount Wilson. First time I went to Mount Wilson, and they open up the dome for the 100-inch telescope, and then Edward Hubble's bentwood chair, so they claim, is still sitting
right there. Wow!
And you kind of look up, and it feels like being in a cathedral, because I love cathedrals. My wife's from Cologne, Germany, and the dome there is just magnificent. And you can imagine in your mind's eye 500 years ago, this is the biggest thing anyone would have ever seen. Yeah. And it took centuries to build. That does present that kind of sense of awe.
Yeah.
So maybe it means something like bigger than me, outside of me, which is really what you're touching on.
And moreover, still connected to me and to all of us in a deep way. I mean, Carl Sagan said it in a wonderful way. It's hackneyed, perhaps, because we've said it so many times since, but only because it's deeply true. We are made of the same stuff that's out there in the universe. And moreover, because of the way particles are arranged inside our minds, we can think about things that are relevant back to the Big Bang, toward the far future, relevant here, relevant out to the Andromeda Galaxy, relevant way out to the edge of the observable universe, and maybe even beyond. And that connects us in a very deep and meaningful way.
By the way, it is true to say that the laws of nature, as far as we know, are uniform throughout the cosmos. Therefore, if we encountered aliens, they would do something like physics and math the way we do it.
as far as we can tell. I mean, there have been a lot of studies trying to even find subtle differences. Perhaps some of those numbers we discussed before, maybe they vary across cosmic history. So you look way out into space, where you're basically looking back in time, and you ask yourself, are, say, the spectral lines of hydrogen a little bit different back then than they are today, suggesting that these numbers, these constants of nature might vary, but there's no evidence of any such variation, at least not yet.
Yeah. Yeah, another one of my favorite topics that I've been playing with is the Mysterians. There's certain mysteries that cannot be explained. Not just that we're not smart enough, but they're conceptually difficult to get our minds around. The word, even nothing. I mean, what does nothing mean? I mean, you guys walk through, okay, there's no atoms, there's no particles, there's no planets, and so on. But there's not even any space-time. But you have to go further than that. There's no even Platonic concepts.
Yeah.
Even the concept of nothing can't exist. Nothing cannot be nothing. I mean, at some point you just hit a wall and go, I don't even know what I'm talking about.
Well, it may be that we just don't have the language or the conceptual framework for addressing certain qualities of reality. Again, like from an evolutionary perspective, we were under pressure to develop a means of talking about things that presumably helped us to survive. We began to communicate. We could work in groups. We could pool our strength. We could put our brains together to solve problems, right? But understanding the deep truths of reality, that doesn't really necessarily have any survival value. In fact, you know, it could well be that those of our forebears who decided to sit down on the African savannah and contemplate quantum mechanics and general relativity did not see the lion that was coming, right? They're the ones that got eaten, and that predilection wouldn't have been seeded on into the gene pool. So we are entering realms that are very different from the kinds of challenges that we as a species have had to overcome. And so maybe as yet we don't have the conceptual basis for talking about some of these qualities. And nothing is a big one. And people use the word in different ways, right? Empty space, or it could be no space, no time, no laws, no logic. You know, where does it begin? Hard to know.
I began Heavens on Earth with imagine yourself dead. Now, you ask people this, people go, well, I see myself in the casket there and my relatives are sad. You wouldn't see anything. There's no experience at all.
Probably better to say, think about the time before you were born. Because that's sort of the symmetry.
Same thing. That's right. So, on these Mysterian mysteries, so you deal with consciousness and free will. So let's dive into those.
Yeah.
Consciousness, I think, is another one of these conceptual problems that may not be a scientific problem. Steve Pinker put it this way in Enlightenment Now, that we envision like our little homunculus can tiptoe into your brain to see what the red looks like in your head, and then come back and go, oh, his red looks like my red. You know, it's just sort
of
this.
What does that mean? If you think it through. Yeah. Right, exactly. But I think there is a puzzle that I think may be amenable to scientific insight, which is, you know, how could it be that inside of our heads there's an inner world of experience at all? Not that I try to experience your inner experience, which means I'm actually experiencing it in mine as opposed to your head, but why is there anything happening inside, right? Why are the lights on? Why is the movie running? Why is the voice in there? Why can we sort of have these inner sensations and reflections? And that's puzzling, called the hard problem of consciousness, because if we are just made of particles governed by physical law and the particles themselves don't have inner worlds, how do many of them come together to yield inner worlds?
So you're not a panpsychist.
Well, it's an interesting proposal, and I understand where it comes from, the motivation. Look, you can say, what's the answer to the question of how mindless particles yield a mindful brain? They can't. They themselves need to have a inner world of experience, a proto-consciousness, as some people call it. Put enough of them together, pool the proto-conscious qualities, and you yield conscious awareness. That's a nice solution, but it basically just sort of says there's a new fundamental quality of the world. We can't really say what it is, but we know that when you have enough of them together, they yield the conscious awareness. So it's kind of shifting the puzzle to someplace else. You know, my own view is reflect back on the 1800s. People asked a very similar question about life, not consciousness. How can lifeless particles in aggregate come together and yield a living system? Answer, some people said they cannot. You need to inject something else, the life force. Exactly, vitalism. But I really don't think anybody talks like that anymore because as we've examined biology with great detail, people have become comfortable with the notion that particles and laws are all you need to yield a living system. I think the same will happen with consciousness. When we understand the brain well enough, I think we'll just become used to the idea that when groups of particles are this organized, moving in the manner that happens inside of our heads, conscious awareness is just what happens.
Yeah, I think if we think of it instead of a light switch, the lights came on, he's conscious, that it's more like a dimmer switch.
Absolutely.
So the dog has this amount of consciousness, the chimpanzee more, and us, and so on. And I think that applies to the free will question. I like Dan Dennett's degrees of freedom concept. That is, a machine has just a few degrees of freedom, an insect, not many, a bacteria, just 2, it goes left or right or forward or back, whatever. You know, dog, many more, and then all the way up to us. So you kind of scale it. So you don't put it in this hard binary choice. You're either free or not. Well, you know, we have more or less free choices depending on the degrees of freedom that we have based on our genes and our environment. And, you know, I'm never going to be an NBA player. I'm not going to win the Tour de France. I have certain restrictions. I'm not going to do quantum physics, but
well, if you want to.
But within my channel, I can bounce around in there. And I try to think of it as, oh, I'm a compatibilist. I don't know if you like any of these labels, but along the lines of Dan Dennett, that that I'm part of the causal net of the physical universe. I know I'm determined, but I can actually, as the time frame is going along, I can actually take some of the variables I know are influencing me and tweak them a little bit. So I'm actively altering the causal net in my little universe just a little bit. Call that what you want. It's still determined, but I see it as a kind of volition.
Yeah. You know, it sounds similar to my perspective, and I've read some of Dan's work and couldn't quite feel that I grasped it at the level that allowed me to say whether or not it fully captured the perspective that I have and articulate in the book, which is, if by free will you actually mean what I think most of us do mean intuitively, which is I am the ultimate author of my actions. I am the place where the decision really takes place, that I am not sort of a collection of particles that are fully governed by mathematical law. That kind of free will does not exist as far as I can tell. And that feels unfamiliar to many people, but I also agree with you that there are variations on the theme of freedom that we do have that are pretty good, and they're distinct, but nevertheless, I think they're satisfying, you know. So perhaps it's similar to what Dan is saying. My view is, look, unlike, you know, a coffee cup, we are configured in such a way that the repertoire of behaviors that we are able to execute is enormous. We don't choose those behaviors, but look at the range of things that we can do, right? I'm doing them right now, just a small, you know, spectrum of the larger collection that we're able to execute. And so the kind of freedom that I think is worthy of attention and value is that, not that we are free from mathematical control. We are bags of particles governed by physical law, and that's all there is to it. So it's not freedom from that determining influence, but rather it's the freedom to exert a huge range of behaviors and responses based on the stimuli that we encounter in the world.
I think of it like the behavioral economists do with like the future me is going to be a certain way. Like, I know, just as a silly example, like between, say, 6 and 8 o'clock in the evening, I really have a craving for chocolate chip cookies, all right? And I know I shouldn't, you know, do this. I'm trying to watch my weight. And so I make sure that future Shermer is not going to have that choice because I didn't purchase the cookies earlier in the day when current Shermer went shopping, right? So it's that kind of tweaking the choice architecture, as behavioral economists say. Well, who's doing that? Well, I am. Well, it's still determined. Yeah, but could I have done otherwise? So this is the key question. Could I have done otherwise? Could I have not had the cookie if I chose not to? I think I can, because I don't think the universe is predetermined. But, you know, a lot of people disagree with that. They think, you know, it all started with the Big Bang. But our intuitions, so another example I use in an essay I wrote on this was, you know, imagine, you know, I'm on the road and I'm happily married, but I meet somebody and okay, so this happens. My wife finds out. Well, honey, see, this was all determined by the laws of physics. It all started at the Big Bang. You know, how long? I wouldn't even finish the sentence before, you know, the intuitive sense of that's bullshit. Right. You could have done differently.
Right. And my view is that both of those stories are actually correct and useful. You need the physicist reductionist account if you truly want to understand the basic unfolding of reality, which does say that your particles are governed by physical law. So what you did was absolutely determined by the unfolding of physics, which you can trace all the way back to the Big Bang. But the human level story of reacting to the situation as we typically do is a valid part of the story too. And it's not, in my view at least, that, your wife slapped you, or so to speak, in some retributive manner. See, if someone transgresses, the reason why we talk about free will for the most part is also in terms of responsibility.
Yeah.
Should you be punished for the things that society deems you should not have done? And therefore, are you responsible if you're not free? And my answer is you're completely responsible, even if you're not free, because it's your particles that are in that causal chain that you mentioned that carried out the action that we are talking about. So absolutely you're responsible. Should you be punished? Well, if by punishing you, we can dissuade that behavior from other collections of particles that are going to be recognizing what happened to this collection of particles based on the actions that this collection of particles carried out, then those behaviors can be modified, because you can learn even in a world that does not have free will. A good example that I use in the book is a Roomba, right?
Yeah,
right. If you have a Roomba, is it free? I don't think a Roomba has free will. Does it learn? Of course it does. At least the high-end versions do.
Yeah.
If it slams into a piece of furniture, if it goes near a staircase, it maps the environment, and that affects what it subsequently does. It learns even though it is not free. Similarly, if I see you punished for some action, my particles can reconfigure based on the stimuli that I see by virtue of the punishment that you received, and that can dissuade this collection of particles from following suit. So if punishment is doled out in a manner that's meant to influence future behaviors, as society deems those behaviors to be better or worse, that's a good reason for punishment.
Yeah.
But punishment because, you did something wrong and I want to hurt you because of that, I think that's misguided, because you're not free in the sense that we were talking about.
Retributive justice versus restorative justice.
Exactly.
We're hopefully moving in the direction of more restorative justice. All right, just continuing, I have my list here of great topics. I love the Jay-Z Knight story, because we followed Jay-Z Knight since the early 90s. Yeah.
Okay.
So Jay-Z Knight, just for those of you who don't know, who is a psychic channeler who talks to this 35,000-year-old Cro-Magnon, whatever, spirit warrior Ramtha. And you got invited to go speak there almost accidentally. Do you have any idea why they invited you?
Well, I think they like to have scientists because presumably it gives the whole aura of gravitas,
right.
I guess, is my suspicion. And the invitation came in as I described in the book. I wasn't paying attention, and I didn't really look at who the sponsor was. And a day before, I realized I was going to go to Ramtha School of Enlightenment, and it was distressing. I wanted to pull out, but it was sort of too late to do it in a graceful manner. So I did go, and it was a very curious experience.
I'm glad you did, because I think it's good for scientists to experience sort of my world of craziness, because there's a lot of that out there. But what was interesting to me about the story was, even though you walked them through why they weren't actually finding these psychic connections, it was randomness and so on, they were still glad to talk to you, but still didn't seem to connect, like none of this is real.
Yeah, as I described in the book, I walked into a big barn filled with people. Before I said a word, I got a standing ovation. It was just, it was okay, I'm fine. But then as I started to give the lecture and went through some of the things that I'd seen during the day, where people trying to guess the next card in a deck, or firing arrows blindfolded and like 1 in a million times hitting the target, and being really excited that random event happened. And I described it all to them, and I kept just getting standing ovations from what I was saying. And I turned to them finally and said, I like the standing ovation, but why are you clapping? I'm telling you, everything you're doing is kind of craziness. And it was only later on when people would talk to me more one-on-one and say, look, we recognize that there's a lot of weird stuff happening here, and it's good. We're glad that you're here and calling it out, but we just feel that there is more out there, and we'd like to be around people who feel the same way. And at that moment, I kind of got it, because I feel the same way. There's cool, weird stuff out there that science reveals, and I understand the impetus to be part of that journey. The problem is we've developed the techniques and the methodology that allows us to go in a direction that demonstrably takes us toward a truer version of the world. And the techniques that Ramtha and other people there are undertaking don't do that. And it's that distinction which is pretty vital.
I think they like physicists because, particularly quantum physicists, because quantum physics is spooky and weird, and consciousness or spirituality is spooky and weird. So they must be connected.
Yeah.
You remember that movie, What the Bleep Do We Know?
I remember it well.
And then before that, the Tao of Physics and the Turning Point, Friedrich Capra. I read all that stuff. It just seems like, whoa. And then, well, maybe not.
No, you're absolutely right. The problem is just conflating two things because they're both odd, strange, weird, and therefore they somehow must be connected to each other, which is anything but true. I mean, the weirdness of quantum physics was not dreamed up in somebody's head. It came from studying the data.
Right.
And it came from developing the equations to explain the data and then taking the equations seriously and using the equations to make predictions, which we then tested in other experiments. So step by step by step, it's so careful and precise. And yes, the weirdness emerges from that journey, but it's forced upon us by the universe, not by the imagination.
Right. And so it's almost like a God of the gaps argument. So we don't know what consciousness is, and we know quantum physics is spooky and spooky action at a distance, right? So there must be some, and then from there you spin off into ESP and psychic.
Right.
But I'm glad you did this because it's a great story. It reminds me of Feynman writing about going to Salon Institute in Big Sur.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So he gives his lecture on physics, much like you did, and of course they all love Feynman. And then he describes being in the hot tub. They have natural hot tubs there.
Yeah. They're
clothing optional hot tubs, and everybody opts out of the clothes.
Right.
And anyway, so he's in there, and some guy's doing reflexology on some woman's foot, and he's like, "Oh, I think I got your pituitary here." And Feynman says, I blurted out, "You're a long way from her pituitary, man." And then they looked at me and I slunked under the water. Anyway, he's got some great funny stories there. But again, they bring the scientists in like, okay, so, we're doing this here and you're doing something similar. Not really similar, but it feels similar.
Right.
Which is okay. So, the other thing about Jay-Z Knight, when we first started Skeptic, this was all in the news, a German psychic started channeling Ramtha from Berlin. And Jay-Z Knight sued her. He's like, no, I own
copyright protection.
Copyright protection.
Oh my
and she
God.
won.
Is that right?
Yeah, she got an $800 settlement from this Berlin psychic. So in a way, it was a concession that, yes, I made it up. I own the rights. Like J.K. Rowling owns Harry Potter, Jay-Z Knight owns Ramtha.
But that's kind of amazing.
I know.
I was not aware of that.
Yeah. I mean, it's revealing that
totally revealing.
Because if Ramtha's real, then anybody
can, right? It's as if I'd say you can't work on hydrogen.
Right.
Hydrogen's mine, buddy.
right. That's too funny. And then other revelations came out when she had her divorce from her fifth husband.
Yeah.
He said, I was there when she made up Ramtha in the kitchen or whatever. Anyway, because he was kind of bitter.
Yeah. No, as I described in the book, I was curious about where I was going, so I looked up a video, and my daughter was next to me, and I found this Merv Griffin video where, she just sort of makes believe or, claims that she's channeling Ramtha on national television. And it was just so obviously something that was made up. And then the curious thing, too, is I looked at a few more videos, and the accent that she uses for Ramtha in those early days, well, the accent changes over time because, it's hard to maintain a fabricated accent. It tends to shift, whereas, an individual's accent tends to be pretty constant.
And where did they speak English with an Indian accent 35,000 years ago?
Exactly.
Yeah. So, well, let's talk about God and religion. So you have a whole section on that. I think it's useful to separate, belief in God, which has its own set of causal reasons, and then maybe religion as a social institution. What is your sense of why we are so religious?
Well, if you look at the potential evolutionary track that would lead us to a religious perspective, a number of researchers have pointed out there's a natural story that one can tell there, right? Number one, we're the unique species on the planet that knows about its own mortality, right? We recognize that we are going to die. And that can be a debilitating realization, right? It can trouble us here and now, but you can imagine in the early days, it would have been perhaps even more commanding. So religion came up with an absolutely clever solution to that. Well, if you see the physical form die, okay, that's real, but there's something else that carries on.
Right.
Wow, that feels so much better. So it's kind of a wonderful solution, a very clever solution that various religions have come up with. So that coupled with the fact that, evolution and social groups face an interesting problem in the early era of our species, which is, from an evolutionary perspective, we understand why I will sacrifice myself or put myself in harm's way to protect those that are closely genetically related to me, because it only matters if our genes propagate. It doesn't matter if it's literally mine or my sister's or my brother's, right? As long as it gets to the next round, that's all the genes care about. But if you have larger groups, why would we ever put ourselves in harm's way for somebody who's not genetically related to us? Well, one possibility is if we both believe in the same religious ideas, then we're bound together by a powerful force that allows us to come together in groups that will be stronger than other groups that don't have that religious glue binding them together. And therefore, potentially over time, the groups that have this religious affiliation will win out. And they will then pass on the predilection to have this kind of religious affiliation. Darwin actually believed a version of this idea. This is highly controversial.
Yes.
But Darwin had a version of this. He was basically saying those groups that were bound together by a common religious belief are the ones that would prevail and therefore pass on potentially that belief.
Yeah, I think, as you know, this group selection is pretty controversial. I'm skeptical of group selection. I don't think you need it. I think you can do everything you just described and still have the individual as the target of selection. Just the individuals themselves are more likely to survive in a group.
But that's exactly what I would say too.
I think you do actually say that.
Yeah, a lot of the argument about group selection, which I didn't dwell on, it's in the end notes, because the more I read about the controversy, the more it felt to evaporate under strong gaze.
Yes.
In fact, I think David Sloan Wilson, again, it's highly controversial, makes mathematical arguments that it doesn't matter how you carve it this way, it looks like it's group selection. You carve it that way, it looks like individual selection that may benefit from being part of a strong group. So it feels to me, again, I'm not an expert on that sort of particular argument, and it's controversial, but that doesn't seem to be critical to the ideas that we're talking about.
I think if we think of it as a social science problem to solve, like what's the cause of war, what's the cause of homicides, why does crime go up or down, it's never anybody that comes up with one vector that says that's the cause. Very unlikely to be the case. Like the whole Freakonomics explanation for the decline of crime was the abortion, Roe v. Wade, 73. So too simple, too cutesy. Religion, I think, is probably the same thing. It's probably like 4 or 5, 10 different things all working together. The social bondedness is certainly part of it. The awareness of our own mortality. Although, in surveys, when you ask people, why do you believe in God or why are you committed to religion, way down the list is, fear of death. It's not something that's constantly on people's minds, which is why I'm a little skeptical of
Can I jump in on that one there?
Yeah.
So some researchers in this domain would say that makes perfect sense. In fact, that is culture and religion or other forces doing their job so well, because the whole point of these disciplines, these forces, is so that we're not focused on that notion. And, there's this whole, I'm sure you're familiar with it, this whole area of psychology called terror management theory. And it builds on ideas that go back to Ernest Becker and Otto Rank, way back in the history of psychology, social psychology. And when you look at some of their studies, and I got interested in this for a while, so I sort of went through the literature on at least some. It's a very large literature. There are so many examples that I considered quite convincing as scientific studies where simply by reminding someone in even a subtle way of their own mortality, their behavior changed in a significant way, suggesting that a little additional illumination on that quality of the life that you put to the side because it's hard for you to think about it, bring it back into main memory, and your recognition that you're mortal really can have a significant impact on how you behave, even if you say that it doesn't.
Yeah. I wrote about terror management theory in Heavens on Earth. I'm skeptical of it for a couple of reasons. One, it's entirely dependent on unconscious priming of subjects. So when you say, well, I'm not terrorized by death, I don't even think about it. And most people don't walk around their lives like Woody Allen thinking, I can't bother, I'm going to die one day. Most people don't think. Well, so their answer to that is, well, it's unconscious. Okay, then how do you know it's there? Well, because we prime the subjects. Yeah, but how do you know when you think you're priming them to think about death, that's actually what's going on? It is in your head. Yeah. But it's not now. So even though the studies have replicated fairly well, but actually, as a sidebar, a lot of these priming experiments are turning out to be non-replicable, but those have been replicated.
Yeah.
Okay, so this was the same problem. Hans Eysenck wrote about this in the 1950s about Freudian psychology.
Yeah.
You know, you think that you're talking to this person about penis envy or whatever. He wants his mother to be dead and the father dead, have sex with the mother, whatever. That's in your head. That's not in the subject's head. And you think that's what you're measuring. This is always a problem in psychology.
Yeah, I get it. But the one thing I would say, when you go through the vast literature, because the priming is done in so many different ways.
Yeah.
You know, there's the study with the judges in Arizona where the priming was literal. You know, there's a questionnaire where they stuck in one additional question, like, how does your own death make you feel? Then those judges, relative to those who didn't have that question, impose far greater penalties, which aligns with this idea of if someone transgresses, and the law is what keeps your world intact. If they transgress and you're thinking about the ultimate danger, your own death, you're going to impose a harsher penalty. You know, there are other primings where they just interviewed subjects with a funeral parlor right nearby. So, I don't know the literature well enough, but as I read through these, there were so many different ways in, and they all yielded the same result. But yes, these are definitely subtle issues. But the point I would make is whether or not this is why we have religion. I think I agree with you that there could be many factors that result in this. My overall view of religion, I think, is somewhat distinct from many other, or at least some other colleagues who are out in the world basically saying religion is something that occurred in the infancy of the human species and we need to get rid of it.
Yeah.
And I don't feel that way.
You don't?
No.
Why?
Well, because my view is that if you're going to have a literal interpretation of religion, if you're going to use religion to try to explain things in the external world, of course that isn't going to work. If you're interested in the Big Bang or the electron's magnetic moment, you will never get there from Scripture, okay?
Right.
But there are other features of religion if you're willing to cherry pick. And I think that's the vital thing. In the 21st century, and in fact all through human history, you need to take these ideas and bring them up to the era in which you are living. You need to be willing to cherry pick, throw away the parts that don't work for you, interpret other qualities in a way that does work for you. And if it does overall work for you, that's a fine thing.
So this sort of a pragmatism view of truth, of at least religious truth, you might say it's mythically true. So although maybe I think someone named Jesus really existed, probably was crucified, Romans crucified everybody, but, you know, was he resurrected from the dead? Now, that's an extraordinary claim. The evidence for it is not extraordinary, so we might be skeptical of that. But then somebody else says, look, I don't know if it's true or not literally, but mythically true. We should all bear our own cross. Life is difficult. We should forgive, start over, rebirth, and so on. And so those are kind of two separate things.
Yeah, sure. And I'm certainly more in the mythic, although I don't use that language per se, but it's a nice turn of phrase. I view it as there are internal, subjective truths that are relevant at the level of the individual, and they're distinct from the objective truths that we can all go out and measure and calculate and observe about the world. I mean, the human mind and the human experience is a very rich and subtle quality that we all have. And if there are things that can illuminate it, if things that can make you feel better, if there are things that can somehow give you a sense of being part of a larger narrative, a larger whole that enriches your world, that gives you solace. You know, in the book I give one example, like you were saying before, I'm not religious. My parents were not religious. They were secular Jews. You know, my mom is still alive. But when my father died, I took comfort in something that was surprising to me. A minyan, a quorum of Jews came to the house to sing and recite the Kaddish prayer. I had no idea really what they were saying. It was just sounds and rhythm, but it made me feel connected to a 5,000 or longer year history. And in a difficult time, that practice and that ritual and that sense of being part of something larger was useful to me. And it was something that made my life better. So if it was gone and wiped from the surface of the earth, that to me would be a loss.
Yeah, so that's a debate amongst atheists and secular humanists. If religion continues to go to decline, the rise of the nuns and all that, we need to replace it with something, or do we? So, there's a sort of a branch of humanists that think, well, we need to have like a humanist center in every city, humanist wedding ceremonies, humanist funerals, the whole thing. which is really not so different from, say, secular Judaism or what's in New York City. There's the ethical culture. Ethical culture, same kind of thing.
Right.
It sort of implies that humans have a need for something. It may not be a traditional belief in God and traditional religion, but something more than what materialist scientists can offer.
Yeah.
So call that something like humanism or something like that.
Right.
Is that your sense?
Perhaps, but I guess the one thing that it seems not to have, which to me was very valuable, I really needed this tradition to be old. I needed this tradition to sort of reach back across the generations so that I could feel, in some sense, part of this long-standing tradition that somehow just gave me deep solace that others had gone through this, and we developed these rituals, and this is the approach that we take, and that is really where the comfort came from. If it was something that emerged yesterday on these scales,
Scientology,
it just wouldn't feel like that.
What was the Seinfeld episode with Festivus with the metal pole?
Yes, right,
yeah,
exactly.
It's not going to do it.
So that's the one part, and the inner directed journey, like religion sometimes is a loaded word, but that's why I said spirituality earlier as we were talking. But that spiritual quest where you're not taking the lens of scrutiny and looking out to the objective world, but you're turning it inward and you're allowing whatever it is that you need to sort of guide what's going on. And I've spoken about it in other interviews, but I think it's worth bringing up. There's this wonderful book by William James, Varieties of Religious Experience, and that's a real meaningful book to me. It isn't read as widely now. Maybe it is, but I just don't hear people talking about it very much. And here was a scientist, right? A really good scientist, respected psychologist who kind of went through the varieties of ways that the human beings engage with these religious ideas. And it's very broad, right? Sometimes we have in mind, one way in which we have a religious orientation. It's extraordinarily broad. And Pascal Boyer does a wonderful job in his own book of saying, look at the different ways that we engage with a whole variety. Sometimes they're not even supernatural ideas. Sometimes they are supernatural ideas and so on. And, William James just has a beautiful summary at the end where he's basically saying that these kinds of ideas, for some, can give life an extra energy, an extra joy, an extra means of appreciating our experience.
Maybe like art and music?
It can be. That's right. And so view it, if you want, as a fictional story. It's just another piece of fiction.
Yeah.
It's Macbeth, it's Hamlet, but it's just one that's been around longer, and it's one that for some they take in a different way because of whatever it is. They think that it has been around longer, or they feel that somehow it's touching on deeper themes or whatever. They just take it in a more spiritual way.
I loved your discussion on the origins of storytelling, the different theories about it, anyway. Possible evolutionary origins of storytelling, as a way of kind of fictionally running through your mind the different options there are in life of how to engage with other people and things like that. And so, I mean, there's a reason in a sense that Shakespeare and other authors are kind of timeless.
Yeah.
They're touching on deep themes about human nature and the human condition and life and death and all that, in the same way that religion does.
Exactly. I mean, the great writers were great, well, look, they had a way with language, and that's a big part of it. But they also had a way of capturing situations that can touch us because they're so real and they're so valuable to explore, and we can do it in a way that's completely safe. We don't actually have to go out and try to kill our father, or we don't actually have to go out and sort of fight the battle. If it's written in a compelling way, we are there with the character,
like undertaking. Reality.
Yeah. It is a virtual reality in words. So, and that allows us, again, in an evolutionary sense, to perhaps have more refined responses when we encounter curious things in the world that we haven't ever dealt with directly, but we've dealt with it by virtue of seeing how other characters engage with analogous issues and problems.
Yeah. I think in part it's why the general public, particularly who are not religious, are attracted to people like Carl Sagan and yourself and say Neil deGrasse Tyson now, because you guys touch on the deepest themes. I mean, your book really hits every deep theme there is, okay? So it's like we have this need to, at least to address those issues. I don't know if you know the work of Clay Routledge. He's a psychologist at University of Montana. So he did this study. I wrote a column in Scientific American. I call it Sky Gods for Skeptics. And so the research showed that people that are atheists, non-believers, who have a high need of spirituality are more likely to believe that ETIs are out there. Okay. And there's a bunch of variations on this.
Yeah.
People that are not religious but have low need for spirituality, as it was particularly measured, don't tend to believe ETIs are out there or whatever. So his conclusion was that, ETIs are kind of a filler, like deities for atheists. Because in a way, if you think of how ETIs are presented, they're not going to be like just 5 years ahead of us. Like you think at Roswell, they landed and we back engineered, silicon chips because, that was the advanced technology of the day. They're going to be, 10,000 years ahead of us, or a million years or whatever.
Yeah, right.
So they're not going to be anything like us.
Yeah.
And they're not going to be less advanced than us because we wouldn't encounter them. So they're going to be millions of years more advanced than us. That would be indistinguishable from a god. So in a way,
yes, I agree, and it makes a lot of sense. I guess my hope is that people who more deeply understand the unfolding of the whole cosmos and sort of what I cover here from beginning to end may be still interested in, extraterrestrial intelligence. Who wouldn't be? How thrilling to encounter other beings that are out there. But I really strongly feel that the value and meaning that we sort of hunger for, that spiritual connection that we desire, or at least many of us desire, is something that we can find right here in the here and now. And relying again on something out there to give it to us, that seems to me, if it works and they come, fantastic, but it just seems to be an unnecessary move.
Yeah. So much of science fiction is like that. One of my favorite films is The Day the Earth Stood Still, the original 1951 version. It's sort of a Christ allegory. He comes down from on high, mingles among the common people. He's killed. He's put in the tomb. He's resurrected by Gort the robot. It's just so classic.
Right.
But it's again that religious
Same
impulse.
thing. Yeah.
The conference I was back to the two different kinds of truths. The conference I was at with Richard Dawkins and Ken Miller. Do you know Ken? He's at Brown.
Yeah, of course.
So he does a lot of Darwinian stuff. He's a Catholic and a Christian, and he accepts the resurrection of Jesus and the whole thing. But he is, probably our leading debunker of intelligent design creationism, right? So he's not a creationist. And so anyway, so we're on this panel, and Dawkins asks him, okay, so Ken, if we found a piece of the true cross, and on the piece of the true cross was a little chunk of flesh, so we had Jesus' DNA, would it be half DNA because he didn't have a father? And Ken's like, Richard, you're missing the point. Right. I'm not claiming this is some biological fact, some scientific fact. This is my faith tradition.
Right.
So to what extent can you just go, you know what? So for Richard, it's like, nah, not good enough. It has to be really true, or else I'm not going to. Versus,
But I can tell you something though.
Yeah.
So Richard and I had a public conversation in New York, I don't know, about a year ago, at the Beacon Theater in Manhattan. And so I asked him about some of the religious ideas that he'd written about, because I think to the general public, there's an impression that Richard is just like completely dismissive of any value to religion. And I said to him, look, here I am, a rational being, like I do work in physics. I said, but every so often I do irrational things. I'll knock on wood. That's craziness, right? I'll talk to my deceased father. I mean, I don't really think he's hearing me, but I gain something from these experiences. I said, when you hear me say that, do you look at me like I'm a nutter, or like what's your view of that? And he says, no, I completely get it. And I was like, okay, that's cool. So like what he says, maybe he was joking, I'm sure he was, but he said, I would be reluctant to sleep in a haunted house, is what he said. And I was like, well, that was pretty cool to hear, because it's so human.
Yeah.
So we are rational scientists, and when we take our science out to the external world, of course, we make use of rigorous thought, in the language that we physicists use, mathematics, predictions, experiment, observation, calculate that thing to 10 decimal places, compare it to the experiment. That's where truth comes from.
Right.
But as we were saying before, we're complex beings.
Yeah.
And I think we need to allow that some freedom. Not that we go to nutty places where we bring a spiritual or religious perspective to try to explain the external world. That's where you are in trouble.
Yeah.
Big trouble. But if it can give you a clearer sense of your inner world, right, as Ken was seemingly suggesting, it was not a truth about what kind of DNA would be on the cross, but it's his way of making sense of the world in an inner perspective, then I think that's something that we allow for.
Yeah, Martin Gardner called himself a fideist, which is kind of a William James Unamuno's philosophy of pragmatic truth. Now, Martin is one of the founders of the modern skeptical movement, right? He had that column in Scientific American forever and so on. And, you know, he's a hardcore skeptic, just like me, on pretty much everything. But when it came down to that, he said, no, I think there is a God. Now, I know the atheists have slightly better arguments than the theists, but only slightly better. And so his argument, fideism, is that on certain, these kind of Mysterian mysteries, which is where I first encountered this idea, on certain issues like free will, we can't explain this. It's a conceptual enigma. If it works for me to believe I make free choices and it makes my life better, then I have free will. And it's okay for me to believe that, because you can't prove that I don't.
Right.
Right. And same thing with God. You can't prove there's no God. I know the arguments and so on, and yours are better than mine, whatever, but I'm going to believe anyway. Now, this drove people like the Amazing Randy crazy, like, oh my God, we love Martin, but why are you going down this path? And he goes, because it works for me. End of story, end of conversation, really. It's like,
Now, the one thing that I would say in response to that is, let's just take the free will to be concrete. If someone says, okay, I get it, I buy your argument that I don't have free will, I'm a collection of particles fully governed by mathematical equations, no place for me to get in on the action. However, I'm still going to take notice of the sensation that I have of free will. And so I will put weight and value on that sensation, even knowing in the back of my mind that it's simply a quality of the world that I feel, even though it's not a quality of the world that is true. That's my approach. So I don't, in this particular case, or sometimes I do, I don't hold two incompatible ideas in mind. I think that's okay that if that's the approach you take.
Yeah.
But here's an example where I simply substitute a slightly modified version that is by definition human, because I'm saying my sensation of picking up this cup, that felt free, the sensation of free will seems to be absolutely real, and it is real, even though in the back of my mind, I know that's all that it is, a sensation.
Yeah. I think I've tried to do something along those lines with morality. So let's talk about that for a minute, because you deal with this. And my goal with this is to respond to the theist argument. Without God, there's no a basis for objective morality, absolute morality. And therefore, you are, Shermer, a relativist of some kind. And I say, I'm not a relativist. I think there are true moral values. And so, like Abraham Lincoln, I agree. If slavery is not wrong, nothing is wrong. And I go further and say, if the Holocaust was not wrong, nothing is wrong. Can't we say that absolutely? And then I take the next step and say, well, I'm now going from an is to an ought. And my philosopher friends say, you can't do that because we've worked this out, Sherman. You're not a philosopher. I'm like, I know. Okay, maybe technically you can't go from is to ought. But here's, so I'm just going to show you how I do this. So I chapter in my next book, Mr. Hume, tear down this wall. Okay, now I'm told by professional philosophers the wall's not coming down. Okay, fine. So here's how I argue it, and you'll like this because I started with Johannes Kepler. Okay. It is my hypothesis in the same way that Galileo and Newton discovered physical laws and principles about the natural world that really are out there, so too have social scientists discovered moral laws and principles about human nature and society that really do exist. Just as it was inevitable that the astronomer Johannes Kepler would discover that planets have elliptical orbits, given that he was making accurate astronomical measurements, and given that planets really do travel in elliptical orbits, he could hardly have discovered anything else. Scientists studying political, economic, social, and moral subjects will discover certain things that are true in those fields of inquiry. For example, democracies are better than autocracies. Market economies are superior to command economies. Torture and the death penalty do not curb crime. Burning women as witches is a fallacious idea. That women are not too weak and emotional to run companies and countries, and most poignantly here, that blacks do not like being enslaved and that Jews do not want to be exterminated. Why? My answer is that it's in our human nature to struggle to survive and flourish in the teeth of nature's entropy, and having the freedom, autonomy, and prosperity available in free societies, built as they were on the foundation of Enlightenment philosophers and scientists seeking to discover the best way for humans to live, best enables individual sentient beings to live out their evolved destinies.
Right.
So that's how I'm after something. It's not my idea. It's not your American culture. It's human.
Right. But so So I agree with what you're saying there, but the critical part, which you came back to on a couple of occasions, was human nature, right?
Yeah.
So I full well agree that the way this thing inside of our heads has evolved over the course of the evolution of our species is such that there are certain ways of being that we are more in favor of, that work better for the group, that allow us to flourish more than other kinds of behaviors. And those are the ones that we focus attention on, and we want those, and we don't want the other kinds of behaviors. But I wouldn't then from that conclude that it's a universal morality, because when I think universal, I'm sort of thinking universal. Do I allow for the possibility, much as I said with the aliens, they could come down and not use mathematics?
Right.
Is it conceivable that there's alien life out there that has a completely different moral code that may be at odds with ours? I at least allow for that possibility.
Yeah.
It's not that I would be in favor of their moral code. I'm in favor of the one that we all, most of us, tend to agree upon. But my view is that it's just particles and laws at the fundamental level. And I assure you, and as you know well, inside the equations governing the electrons and quarks, there's no morality. There's no right and wrong. There's no beauty. There's nothing there but the mathematics guiding the particles. And it takes large collections of particles to come to conclusions about what behavior is right and wrong. And I agree. So across the species, it's conceivable to me, and I think you made a nice case for it, that there's a universal human morality. But I don't see how you then leap beyond that to
well, I don't know if it's transcendent of our species. Maybe not. Okay, so it's not in the universe, but it's not relative to me, you, our culture, Western culture. You know, show me somebody that likes being enslaved or wants to be exterminated or something like that. Pinker put it nicely.
Yes.
Let's see. He said, on this analogy, we are born with a rudimentary concept of number. But as soon as we build on it with formal mathematical reasoning, the nature of mathematical reality forces us to discover some truths and not others. No one who understands the concept of 2, the concept of 4, and the concept of addition can come to any conclusion but that 2 + 2 = 4. Perhaps we're born with a rudimentary moral sense, and as soon as we build on it with moral reasoning, the nature of moral reality forces us to some conclusions but not others. So, for example, if I appeal to you to do anything that affects me, to get off my foot or tell me the time or not run me over with your car, then I can't do it in a way that privileges my interests over yours, say, retaining my right to run you over with my car if I want you to take me seriously. Unless I'm a galactic overlord, I have to state my case in a way that would force me to treat you in the same kind. I can't act as if my interests are special just because I'm me and you're not.
Right.
So it's kind of a Rawlsian a position, original position that, you don't know which group you're going to be in, so we have to write the law to be fair.
Right. But the laws are written so that the group can function in a coherent, rational, effective manner that allows its individuals to flourish. But it's totally dependent upon the collections that are within the group.
Yeah.
And again, that's why I come back to my other point. I at least allow for the possibility that other collections of particles on some distant planet whose history was radically different from ours, maybe because of the environment or just plain old happenstance, have come to an understanding of what allows their groups to survive and flourish. And it could be that their morality or their rules are relatively different from ours.
It would be interesting, though, if evolution works the same way everywhere, something like natural selection. And this is what Dawkins thinks, that if we encounter extraterrestrials, they'll likely have evolved by natural selection. Now, maybe there's something else. If they don't have the same self-replicating molecules, it goes some other mechanism. But something like that, you'd have to end up in a kind of game theoretic model. Like, there has to be some strategies where I want to selfishly do this, but I know that you want to be selfish, so I have to give up and reciprocal altruism, and then we start building from there, and pretty soon we end up with something like a civil society.
Right, and that may well be true. It may also be limited thinking. And it's very hard for us to know right now. But the reason I say that I allow for the possibility of a distinct morality is because I don't see it in the only quality of the world that I'm quite certain the aliens will be subject to, which is the laws of physics,
right,
and the fundamental ingredients. And that's the only thing that I'm absolutely certain, well, within the observable universe, say there could be other universes with different qualities, but within the observable universe, that's the only thing that I have great confidence that they will be subject to. I don't know how particles can coalesce in all possible environments, in all possible ways in this observable universe of ours. So I'm more open in my thinking about the kinds of morality, the kinds of rules, the kinds of choices and decisions that may emerge in that distinct configuration.
Yeah. By the way, while I've got you, what is your answer to the Fermi paradox? Where is everybody?
Well, you know, the obvious answer is number one, maybe the formation of life is much less likely than we think based on experience here. I mean, even though there may be, I don't know, 20 billion planets just in our galaxy and 100 billion galaxies out there, the natural thought as well. There's so many opportunities for life to take hold that must have taken hold, but maybe not. Maybe the odds against life forming is so fantastically small that even with that great many planets, it only happened once. Another possibility, again, these are not original ideas, but ones that certainly have struck me as plausible, it could be that there's a lot of life out there, but like they're just not that interested in us. You know, how often do you stop and talk to the ants building that anthill, right? You know, so it could be that they're just waiting, or maybe they don't even give a hoot about what we're doing down here, and maybe at some point that they will. You know, some have suggested, well, but look, you know, we're these beings that, you know, now have conquered the planet. Of course people will take note, but we're a little tiny dot in this solar system around this ordinary star in the suburbs of the Milky Way galaxy. Be like, who cares? That could be the answer too.
I think it's just a lot of mostly empty space, and they probably, if they're out there, they missed us, or you know. Well, Brian, I want to be mindful of your time. I'm going to read the final paragraph of your beautiful book because you're such a great writer. As we hurtle toward a cold and barren cosmos, we must accept that there is no grand design. Particles are not endowed with purpose. There is no final answer hovering in the depths of space awaiting discovery. Instead, certain special collections of particles can think and feel and reflect, and within these subjective worlds, they can create purpose. And so, in our quest to fathom the human condition, the only direction to look is inward. That is the noble direction to look. It is a direction that foregoes ready-made answers and turns to the highly personal journey of constructing our own meaning. It is a direction that leads to the very heart of creative expression and the source of our most resonant narratives. Science is a powerful, exquisite tool for grasping an external reality. But within that rubric, within that understanding, everything else is the human species contemplating itself, grasping what it needs to carry on, and telling a story that reverberates into the darkness, a story carved of sound and etched into silence, a story that, at its best, stirs the soul. Man, that is beautiful writing. Thank you for writing this book.
Appreciate that. Thank you.